Good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to have you join us today. Welcome. We have an exciting and interactive session planned for you today. So again, welcome. I'm Kareen Borders, and I'm the Executive Director of West Sound STEM Network. And some of you that I see on here are members of West Sound STEM, so that's super exciting. West Sound STEM Network is an organization. We're a network of over 70 member organizations. Many of them are, from the construction industry, smart buildings. Again, many of you that are on today are members of our network, and if you're not, I'd encourage you to touch base with me afterwards. So West Sound STEM, we work on pathways all the way from early learning through post-secondary connected with workforce to make sure that we have pathways that have equity and access embedded within them, and that have multiple access points for youth so that they can enter pathways that lead to a family wage career in a high demand sector, such as the ones that we're going to be talking about today. I'm very fortunate to get to work with Melanie quite a bit. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and tell us their organization and just a little bit about maybe 1 to 2 minutes about their organization and what they do. So Melanie Danuser, can you start, please?
Hi, welcome everyone. Yeah, I'm Melanie Danuser, and I'm the Director of Education and Training here at the Smart Building Center and Northwest Energy Efficiency Council. My work focuses on training, credentialing, and upskilling those in the field of energy efficiency. I'm actually in my 10th year with the Building Operator Certification Program, and I feel really fortunate to have a career that can positively impact both individuals through career development and the environment through reduced energy consumption.
Wonderful. Thank you, Melanie. Lindsay Velasco, would you go next, please?
Sure. Thanks for having me. Great to have everyone here. My name is Lindsay Velasco. I'm the director of the Building Innovation Hub. And in sharp contrast to Melanie, we've only been live for about a year. So I have nothing on her 10 years of experience doing her certification training. But the Building Innovation Hub is a program in Washington, D.C. We were launched with the support of the district government to support the local building industry really own and design and operate and build, frankly, better performing buildings, especially as new energy performance regulations go into effect and more stringent energy codes are adopted, and as the district works to meet its 2050 goals of being carbon neutral and climate resilient. And so our role in workforce development is a little bit different from the other folks on the panel in that it's really for us about upskilling incumbent labor. So conducting really an on-the-job training and making sure that the existing building industry professionals have the tools and the resources they need to compete for a growing demand for high performance buildings. It's also our job to ensure that we're doing so in an equitable way. So making sure that information about growing business opportunities is communicated to and understood by smaller local companies. And just for a frame of reference, when I say DC, I'm referring to the city and the local market, and not to be confused with sort of the role that Washington, DC plays in sort of the federal space. And that's a good pivot to Maddie.
Thank you, Lindsay. Madeline Salsman, you're next, please.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I'm really happy to be here with Melanie and Lindsay and Kareen today. As folks mentioned, my name is Madeline Salsman. I work at the U.S. Department of Energy. So as Lindsay mentioned, tend to focus a little bit more on the Washington, D.C. we hear about on the news, I guess, nationally focused work. And I've been in the Building Technologies Office, which sits within the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, for about 6 years. And I manage workforce development programming out of the Building Technologies Office. Also, more recently, I've been working with the new administration on efforts that can be cross-cutting across the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy on workforce development and kind of the strategy there. So perhaps in contrast to Lindsay and Melanie, I tend to have much more of a 30,000-foot view on various aspects of the building efficiency workforce, the green buildings workforce, smart buildings workforce, really trying to ensure that at a national scale, we are ensuring that there's pathways for people to enter these careers, that people are aware of the opportunities that they deliver, and are getting the skills that they need through training programs to join join these careers so that when they're in them, we actually have durable career pathways. I'm excited to be here.
Well, thank you. As everybody can tell, we have a phenomenal panel today. And just to make sure you're in the right session, this is the workforce development session, and it goes from 10:30 to 11:45 this morning. We will be using the Q&A to take a look at questions. It's an interactive session, so our panelists will be talking with each other and then also taking a look at questions as well. Please feel free to use the chat to connect with each other and talk with each other. We won't really be monitoring the chat for questions, so if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A. So I'd like to toss the first question out to everybody, to all of the panelists here. From your lens, what are the major trends creating workforce challenges for the design, engineering, installation, and servicing and operations of commercial and institutional buildings? And then kind of tagged on to that, how is that being felt by owners and operators of buildings, construction and service industry, and educational institutions?
I'll go first. So just to answer the first question about trends in sort of workforce challenges, if you will. I mean, everyone in this audience and this whole conference, right? I mean, everyone knows that buildings are becoming more technically complicated, and especially as we start to rely on them to do more things. And it's not just for tenants anymore, but we've got amenities, we've got security, we've got infrastructure. And especially as we start to look at how buildings are connected to backup power and connected to each other and connected to the grid, it all makes for make them much more advanced than they ever were before, and it creates a lot of data to manage, of course. And so there's just a lot more to be done within buildings than was done before. And I think the thing for me that's also fascinating, and this was actually an article that just came out in GreenBiz maybe a few weeks ago, but it also focused specifically on the growing need for ESG talent. And so that companies are starting to look at all of this data and all of this information and how buildings perform. It's not as much about data collection as it was, and now it's about business strategy. So when we're talking about workforce challenges and building operations, it extends outside of just the sort of four walls and the roof, if you will, because it's now tipping into the lens of, or the realm of, how businesses operate. And I think those are creating different workforce challenges than sort of the original way this all was conceived, which is like, do we have enough engineers to manage the buildings, right? There's a whole sort of larger discussion that needs to be had around the workforce that is needed to own and manage and operate and design buildings.
Oh, Madeline, we can't quite hear you, and it doesn't look like you're muted.
Oh,
there you go.
Does that work? Double muting myself just in case, and then forget about it. But yeah, I'll just piggyback off of what Lindsay said. We've had a few different ways that we've been conceiving of the barriers in the workforce today, really across the entire green buildings industry, but I think it applies to the smart buildings operators and installers workforce in particular as well. The first is that, quite simply, a lot of people who are potentially interested in this as a career pathway are not aware of it as a career. It's often hidden away, and buildings kind of work behind the scenes to most people that occupy them. And so there is often kind of just a lack of awareness about what jobs are available, what can be exciting about those jobs. And so the first kind of step from DOE's perspective is, how do we increase awareness and interest in the careers that are currently available and trying to hire? There's also often quite a few confusing career pathways. There's not often a feeder program going directly into a class of, or a cohort of, building operators that graduates every year and then gets placed throughout the country. That's just not really how we're used to thinking of this industry working, even though that is kind of the standard in a lot of other industries. And so, that means that even if folks think that they're interested, they need to figure out a lot of the pathways themselves. They might need to kind of take a hodgepodge of different engineering, IT courses. Maybe they're interested in the environment. Maybe that's why they're interested in buildings, and figure out how to kind of get the skill sets that they need. And then finally, I think part of what Lindsay was touching on as well, there's even if somebody is able to navigate that pathway, it can be really hard to make sure that people have the skill sets in particular, I think IT and cybersecurity that we're seeing become more and more relevant these days as we talk about buildings being more interconnected and wanting more out of our building performance, to really ensure that people are able to deliver on the benefits that these technologies are able to provide. Unfortunately, not a shortage of challenges, but Melanie, you want to chime in?
Sure. Thanks, Madeline. Yeah, I think, for me, it's understanding that technologies needed to achieve the goals of carbon neutrality, other policies in the built environment, they're available today. But unfortunately, there's, as Maddie just pointed out, there's no shortage of issues here, lack of proper installation of these technologies, lack of commissioning, incomplete operation and maintenance of complex building energy systems. Lindsay spoke to that, how building systems are just becoming even more complicated. It really prevents the benefits of these systems from being realized. And building operators, my work focuses a lot on the operations and maintenance. They're not meaningfully engaged. I think part of the question was the design. They're not meaningfully engaged in the design process, and then they lack the training necessary to optimize these new systems that are installed and deployed in buildings. So training too often, I think, consists of just simply providing user manuals that end up sitting on a shelf. And at the same time, to Maddie's point, our trades workers are aging out of the workforce in droves without this pipeline. It's not like you can just go to a university where they're churning out accountants, per se, and go find yourself a building operator. It's much more difficult to do that. So there's just this acute shortage of skilled workers in the trades, and this upcoming generation that, we still need to find a really clearer way to even identify them. When we do, we really need to work on this equitable access to training, credentialing, and that starts with, to both of my colleagues' points, clear career pathways in the clean energy and built environment. So yeah, a lot of work to be done. I really liked Lindsay's point about this holistic viewpoint. When you really tie it to the business strategy for owners, it becomes more real, when they can really look at it from that viewpoint and not just another job to fill, that it really has implications on the entire strategy. So great point there.
And just to build on that a little bit too, Melody, one of my biggest grievances with the building industry, and I'm an architect by training, and so I come from that perspective, is very much so the segmented nature of how a building life cycle operates, and sort of a handoff from, okay, the owner gives it to the designer gives it to the contractor to the operator. So to your point about just like handing the how-to manual off, a lot of information that could be done as on-the-job training as part of workforce development, if you will, gets lost in that handoff process. And so we're always thinking about how do you actually frankly extend contracts or extend people's abilities to be able to influence sort of someone else's portion of that life cycle, so that the lessons learned and the ideas and the intents behind design or operations or commissioning procedures are sort of channeled through or sort of given to the next group of people who are in charge of taking care of that building. So it's also thinking through how the industry operates for me too, is preventing more of this from happening.
Yeah, that chain of command, absolutely. And I think, Corinne, you were asking, also how this is being felt by different like owners and operators, different industries, right?
Yeah, so through different lenses, how is it being felt by owners and operators of buildings, the construction and service industry, and also educational institutions?
I think to Maddie's point, I think it goes to I can't speak to the higher education. That's not my bag, but I will speak a little bit on the owners and operators in the construction service side, and that they're having a hard time finding seasoned, experienced engineers and managers to do that and to run their facilities. And a lot of what we see here in DC is sort of your experienced building engineer goes from this building to that building and that building to this building. They sort of barter and trade. But to Maddie's point, sort of how you're actually filling those positions as sort of your seasoned engineers start to retire is the big issue, and sort of finding that point of entry to get folks into the profession has become really challenging, and trying to sell that these are great jobs, and not just great jobs, but great careers that allow flexibility and growth over time, I think is part of the thing. So I think owners and operators are having a hard time finding the folks that they need, especially given the fact that buildings are, of course, more complicated. And it's very similar, I think, for the construction trades as well. They're hard jobs. They're not easy. And so trying to tell people and bring people in to talk about the benefits and how great those careers can be challenging to get people in as well. So I think it's challenging to get folks in, and it's not a direct path, which is always the issue. Not like a single source pipeline.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just add that I think there's, I think we can manage these issues, but I'll say that I think there can be an unfortunate feedback loop where if owners and operators feel like they can't figure out how to have somebody working in the building that's able to manage and make decisions based off of data analytics, the value proposition of installing technology that can provide them those analytics, it kind of goes out the window, right? And so it can be kind of this negative feedback loop where if we can't kind of inject some expertise into the space that's able to be in the building and say, hey, some of these types of tools will be really helpful to improving our performance in a way that will be felt by building owners and occupants. It's hard to, it's a little bit of like a chicken and the egg situation of not being able to leverage the benefits of the technologies that do exist. So, I think a lot of owners and operators, especially if they're not like, managing or have assets that are like Class A buildings and very large, I think it's really hard for them to even imagine entering the space. They're like, the person I have that does manage aspects of this building's operations has very little training, and so how are they going to integrate into this technology landscape? And so I think, Lindsay, as you were mentioning, a lot of your core interest is trying to upskill folks that are already in the industry and probably taking a pretty broad approach, right, of who is in this industry. Like, when do we have people that don't really have any training in building operations, but this is kind of a part of their job by the nature of the fact of that they're in the building and doing some of this work.
Yeah, all good points. And I wanted to point to the Massachusetts recently, the program administrators there for Mass Save recently issued an energy efficiency workforce development study. And they found that over 92% of employers were finding it hard to hire. And that was for all trades. This touches on custodial operations, procurement, and the points that are needed to inform both the incoming and incumbent workers about the benefits of these careers, and providing them again with a clear picture of what progression through the organization looks like, and tying that to a training and credential framework, I think is really important. And I saw Steve's comment in the chat to us, which was really about everyone looking for someone with experience. And I think, I know I'll talk a little bit about that more with what BOC is doing to try to encourage more people to get into the pipeline, but it's a great point, Steve. So it just something that I think we'll get to organically throughout the conversation. But
one of the themes that I've heard already is just the difficulty and the need for skilled workers. And several of you touched on it. And there's a question in the Q&A that I think actually might be really appropriate right now. So in addition to that, like thinking about how do we make this pipeline accessible from an early age and awareness, right? Because kids in high school and teachers and counselors may not even be aware of these careers. Actually, I know that's some of the work that we do. So that's a little bit of a leading question. And some of our partners I see that are on here today, Long and ATS and McDonnell Miller and Smart Building Center, we're all collectively, working towards that. So I'm gonna see if the panel can take a look at or answer the question in chat. There is an attendee who works in the community college and wants to do some outreach specifically around these careers. So what advice would you give somebody at the community college? And I'm going to extend that to the high school sector as well. So what advice would you give counselors or somebody in the community college to develop awareness in youth for these careers?
I'll go first by saying I would point them to Maddie at the Workforce Accelerator and some of the the great resources they have there to really infiltrate and explain that these are careers. They're not just jobs. There's opportunity. And I think, to your point, Corrine, it starts almost at home, with parents even understanding the opportunities that are in these careers. So I'll let Maddie talk a little bit about that. But honestly, that's what I've been doing since we've been involved with the Accelerator. Not only, that, but pointing to apprenticeship programs. Corinne's been, alluding to that work that we're doing here in Seattle. So there's a lot of resources available. It's just, for people to know where to ask the questions, that needs to get out. So I'll let Maddie talk a little bit.
Well, thank you, Melanie. And these are definitely some of the questions that we're trying to think through on the DOE side. I'll put kind of one link in the chat quickly called the Green Buildings Career Map. This is a resource that DOE funded through the Interstate Renewable Energy Council to create kind of a visual online resource of here's a whole variety of careers that are currently hiring in green building spaces. And so, there's a wide range of options. Part of the goal with this project was not just to say, 100% of these require an engineering degree, even if, a bunch of them do. There's also a lot of trades options that, apprenticeship programs would be a really great fit for. And then more creative fields as well, and things like being a draftsperson and becoming an architect or designer. So trying to really broaden the scope of what people see as a green buildings career, and then clarify some of the pathways into these jobs as they currently exist. This map features 55 because if you feature probably even 56, it starts to become a little overwhelming to folks. But we wanted to center in on the ones that we think have the most growth potential and the most likely to be hiring in the nearest term, right? That, there are other jobs that are super important. So this is by no means exhaustive, but really trying to hone in on a resource that would be accessible to career counselors in particular to be able to point students towards. But I think this still continues to be an interest area and a puzzle for DOE. We are interested to engage more with high school counselors, frankly, and figure out what are resources besides this one that we can be providing that will be really useful and interesting to that audience. I want to acknowledge that I think trying to do this work amidst the COVID-19 pandemic has been a really tough time to be a school counselor. And they are focused on career education as well as student mental health and access to technology resources. So, I think trying to figure out how we can make resources that are easy to understand and use and pass along for this audience so that we're not kind of, expecting that they become full experts in this whole industry to be able to support their students. I can provide some other links in the chat. I don't want to take up too much time with just describing websites, but we've been trying to centralize some of the resources that exist in this space to create more of a map of sorts for young people and people looking to change careers. So I'll also provide a link to a website that DOE manages, the Better Buildings Workforce Portal, where we're just it's closer to a database at this point, and so trying to really consolidate lots of different information. But it is a wealth of resources. So if you maybe less for the career counselor, but if you are somebody that is interested to enter this space and looking at what training opportunities exist, and other resources may be of interest to you, that might be a useful link as well.
I think for me, one of the larger sort of global problems, and I think it gets to the question about sort of bringing in sort of entry level, is like we're sort of missing the apprenticeship sort of layer to all of this, where if everyone committed to having one intern a year, paid intern, and I know that a lot of times it's a time thing, not a cost thing necessarily, but like that would be huge to just bring in new workforce. Because I think a lot of us probably benefited from having a great mentor younger on. And like those types of things really have the impact. And so even just coming out of high school or college and seeing that there's internships available in a field, that's might just be a quick way to get people interested and engaged. And so anyway, it's kind of a challenge to everyone to just bring on an intern in many ways, because I think it can have a huge impact.
Yeah,
on like a
no,
singular,
and
like an easy level.
Yeah, sorry, Melanie, you go first.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was one other thing I did want to mention, that, you know, somebody else wrote in the comments that, you know, everybody's always looking for experience, and like, I hear you on that. It's so frustrating. So I challenge folks that, you know, how much do they really need when you're hiring? Think about how much experience you actually really need somebody to have versus more of an attitude and ability to learn. I think that, you know, nobody's going to come into many of these jobs with the absolute perfect array of doing exactly all the things already. And really trying to build up more pathways and options for whether it's paid internships, paid apprenticeship, and paid on the job learning. You know, can you work flexibly with a local community college or a local university where you're getting some support from students who are currently in a class that's really relevant to the work that you're looking for, and really trying to build up some of those relationships in a way that I think will create stronger pathways for people.
Thank you. And related to that is a question, you know, in thinking about recruitment and education efforts, is a question, and that's been touched on, but how are we overcoming engagement challenges during the pandemic where in-person recruitment and education efforts have all gone digital?
I'll just say it's really hard. You're not the only one struggling. Not very helpful, but
I think the hesitancy of all of us is that I don't know that any of us have solved that problem yet. I think I can say that we've tried to tackle it in a way that we feel we are capable of, which is sort of moving trainings online or doing outreach or sending out mailers. And so I don't know that we've solved it, but it's something that we're struggling with and trying to do, and knowing that we're probably going to be in this predicament for longer means that we have to keep at it to encourage engagement.
Absolutely, I agree. There's not, you know, one silver bullet for that. I know for our work, it's really been about getting creative. And we did, you know, to Lindsay's point, we pivoted all of our training virtually. And then there's the issue of how do you reach folks now when they're not in their office? They might not be, and you know, we can't give them a call. We don't have the right contact information. Mailers are stacking up on desks. So it was really about getting creative to reach our audience, to let them know that these things are still happening. You know, financing has been an issue with a lot of question marks for both the private and public sector on budgets, trying to get, you know, tying our curriculum to not only energy efficiency, but also the, you know, emerging needs from the pandemic as far as IAQ. So I think just being able to think outside of the box and trying to still have that presence. It's been a lot more individual attention, you know, one-on-one, trying to just figure out the best way to reach these groups that otherwise we might have been able to shake a hand at a conference. You know, I know every year I'm able to go to Energy and Facility Connections in Leavenworth, Washington, talk to the state agencies, and that's gone, right? You know, so it's me, just more individual attention. And that's time consuming and valuable. But those are just a couple of ways that we've tried to get creative throughout the pandemic. Yeah, none of them are perfect, but we're working on it.
yeah, I'll just echo the interest to try to have more one-on-one conversations wherever possible. I think, you know, I've noticed that there's people feel more anonymous online, and it's hard to, I think, always feel totally engaged when you kind of know there's lots of people in a space virtually, and you can kind of have to pay attention. And I feel myself doing it too. It's not a critique on anyone. And so, yeah, I think part of it is, maybe adjusting what our metrics and what success looks like is super important as a starting point. And then saying, what we're going to try to do is engage with people fairly individually, because I think that ends up being an easier way to kind of get information across when, I remember at the very beginning of the pandemic, we started doing some things online, and thousands of people would call in to a webinar because it was like, it was kind of new and people felt like, oh, you can engage in anything. And now I think, especially not knowing, how long kind of at least, partially virtual events are going to be taking place, figuring out ways to have more one-on-one engagement.
I will say that something else that we have started doing and are going to be doing more of is roundtables, virtual smaller roundtables, to make sure that we're facilitating engagement. So for an example, when we were first launching the Building Innovation Hub and we asked folks in the industry, like, how do you best learn? And the answer far and away was peer-to-peer learning. So like, there's only so much that we as the hub can sort of say on webinars. It means more when people are learning from their peers. And so what we're trying to do is get the word out about smaller roundtables, so 8 to 10 people, so that even though you're virtual, there is more of a sense that it's time to participate and be an active listener, an active learner, an active speaker. And so bringing folks together in that type of environment. And we've been leaning a lot on our government and pseudo-government and utility partners to help get the word out to different folks, to make sure that we're just not talking within our own network, but we're using our partners and their networks to help spread word far and wide about the types of services or convenings that we'd like to do, because our role is to try and convene people even in this virtual environment. So that's one example of trying to sort of encourage people to have those conversations virtual, because they can't do it in person.
So I think we're hearing that it is really hard. This last year and a half has been really hard, but there's some bright spots and some learning and some innovation that has happened. And we see that also from our West Side STEM side. It's a little bit related to this, but in making sure that our teachers and our K-12 system and our community college system is even aware of these careers. We went virtual and actually ship analogs of the processes and supplies to teachers and community college partners, and then zoom in the industry professionals and actually go through some hands-on training with them. So that was pretty successful, but it's something we wouldn't have tried had we not needed to pivot. So I'm seeing definitely you all described some innovation. I love the small roundtable idea, and you're right, that definitely gets a sense of active participation for sure. Gonna pivot to a little bit about solutions, and then also we've had a request to put our contact information in the chat. So if our panelists are willing to do that, we can get that taken care of in case somebody has to leave before the end of the session. And while you're doing that, so when we think about solutions, and we've touched upon that during these conversations, so it has been kind of a holistic conversation, but let's drill down a little bit on that. When we think about solutions, I'm going to throw a couple of questions out there and pick any of them or all. Who's responding to the workforce challenge, and how is it being organized? Is the federal government prepared to provide national leadership? And how can employers support it? So a couple of things I just rapid fire threw out there, like who's responding to the challenge and how's it being organized? What about the federal government? Are they prepared to provide national leadership? And how can employers support this?
So I can talk a little bit about that on the local level. So in sort of within a frame, if you will. So in DC, our building energy performance standard regulations just took effect. So basically 800 buildings over the next 5 years all have to improve performance. That's huge. That's a lot of buildings that need a lot of work in a short amount of time. And so there are interim milestones as well to consider. And so for us, what I start to see when I look at the way the laws are actually written is I can see that, like, okay, there's going to be this 4-month period where a lot of buildings are all going to try and verify their benchmarking data at the same time. And so there's going to be, and there are specific credentials that are required within the district to do so. So you can say, like, okay, That's something that I can point people to that's very definitive, although that's sort of a chunk in time, if you will. But then you start to overlay some of these things with, well, you've got your energy benchmarking data verification requirements, you've got energy auditing verifications, and where do those credentials overlap? So I start to see this very clear pattern where if you're a certified energy manager, you can be able to do multiple pieces of these legislations, all of which are going to be in high demand in the next few years. And so looking at how the law, and so that's also a task for like either the federal government or different cities to look at how the laws are written and see how those credentials and pieces and timelines start to fit together, so that if someone goes out to get a certification, it means more than just one thing at one time, sort of one building. And so thinking through that. And so our job in that space then is to go to some of these existing companies and say, please make sure that you have certified energy managers on staff. Please make sure that your current staff are prepared. They have these credentials, you're teaching them, you're maintaining their licenses. And so actually earlier today, I went online to see how many certified energy managers there were in DC, and there's not that many. And a lot of them work for the federal government or work for the city and are therefore not available for hire in the same way that you'd want them to be. So that for me is a gap that I can see coming. And so it's my job to sort of encourage and let people know, because I think employers will rise to the challenge when they see that there's business opportunities available. I'm not presenting them as like world saving it. I'm presenting them as these are business opportunities that you can get in front of clients and saying. So anyway, that's how we start to get at sort of fulfilling some of those gaps in solutions, is sort of finding what the legislation opens up and encouraging employers to follow suit.
Melanie or Madeline?
Yeah. Yeah, interested by the question of is the federal government prepared to lead on this front? Because there's a few different ways I can think to take it, but you know, I'll start off by saying that a lot of people are already responding to these challenges in a variety of ways. And so one of the things we've been most interested in on the DOE side is how can we augment the efforts that are already happening and connect people together who maybe are trying to solve similar problems in different regions or are trying to solve different parts of the same problem in the same region, right? And so, you know, didn't fully go into this earlier, but one of the projects that I manage is the Better Buildings Workforce Accelerator, which is a partnership program where DOE is really working to create more of a like peer learning network and space for people to access technical assistance from the federal government, but also from each other on all things green buildings workforce. And, you know, we have over 40 partners that have signed on to that effort, where the premise has been, you know, rather than us setting a goal that folks need to achieve that DOE thinks is important, what we've really asked of folks is, can you articulate to us a goal that you want to achieve that's aligned with our vision of where things go? And if you can kind of articulate that out into, you know, 6 month by 6 month milestones and quantifiable goals, then we'll sign you on as a partner, create, you know, help create this peer learning network, have webinars and workshops to go over common areas of interest, and provide technical assistance for you to achieve those goals. And so, you know, part of the reason we've we've signed on Melanie and Lindsay as well as others on this effort. And so, you know, a lot of what we're trying to achieve there is connecting the dots between organizations that we think are doing really exciting and interesting work, and need, you know, kind of more resources to one another. We are doing a lot more, and I'm so excited by what the new administration has come in saying and about our needs for clean energy jobs, and really kind of centering energy efficient building workers as a key component of that clean energy workforce. And so, you know, we've put some money out the door on new programs and efforts. Even just a week and a half ago or so, we released, we announced the latest round of funding that went out the door on workforce development for the Building Technologies Office. So it's called the Benefit Funding Opportunity, and it includes about $8.5 million for workforce development projects there, and that builds off of an addition, about 5 or 6 million that we had already released over the last year or two. So we're trying to have a bit of a drumbeat of activities that we're funding to, again, with this idea of supporting folks that are already doing a lot of this work and helping them make it bigger and better than it already is.
Yeah, all really good points by my co-panelists here. I also wanted to reference something, that goes back almost a decade to the Federal Personnel Training Act, which I think is a great effort that really identified these core competencies needed to operate buildings, and just to the point of actually identifying skills, work that's being done in this arena. Lots of associations, IFMA, the International Facility Management Association, has established core competencies for facility managers. We here at the BOC program use the DOE skills standard for building operations. So I think that there's really good effort underway in this to identify these skills that are needed. And to Madeline's point, as far as the workforce accelerator, so we're not duplicating efforts, right? We can streamline these efforts, and it really assists us. For us, we're a small nonprofit. We're trying to do all that we can, but these resources are really valuable when we're trying to educate and credential those in the field. So I think there's existing work out there that can be referenced, so employers and building owners and operators don't feel like they're starting with a blank piece of paper. And also kudos, Lindsay referenced the credentials being referenced in some of in policy, and that's great, right? If it's in policy, then we see the traction to get people trained, to get them credentialed, and it starts at the top there. So it's been really refreshing to see those references to professional development and credentials for meeting some of these stringent environmental carbon reduction policies across the US. We're seeing the same thing, Lindsay, here in Seattle for CEM, BOC level 2 to qualify to do energy audits, comply with our clean buildings performance standards. Those are great ways to give some extra motivation for training and credentialing.
Yeah, I guess just one other point I wanted to add is, I think as I kind of alluded to, we're seeing a lot of excitement with the new administration that we've seen. In May, they put out, the White House put out some press releases on wanting to do more on decarbonizing buildings, and had a whole kind of roundtable discussion about it with a variety of members of the cabinet. And I think we're seeing a ton of excitement in this area. So I, along with hopefully many of the folks on the call, want to really capitalize on that. And I think, I'll just flag for folks that this is it is a shared process. It is not just, the federal government saying, here's our priorities, fall in line. What we would love to be engaging with folks on is, what is really the support you need? We tend to hear we need workforce development support. Great. Okay. What does that look like? If we are putting money out the door, what does that need to be funding specifically? Is it trainers? Is it educational tools development? Is it, wraparound services? Is it marketing? Even those, that level of nitty-gritty details really does help us better understand what the true barriers are that folks are facing in the field, and how we can best utilize our resources to address them. Of course, I can never make promises on exactly how money is going to be spent in any way, so I wouldn't want to convey that. But we want to be hearing from folks, and it's so helpful when we can get that level of granularity and say, hey, I manage this training program, and these are really the things that I struggle with. And if I had a person on my staff who was doing this for me, that would make a huge difference, right? That level of specificity, because at the end of the day, there's the folks at the absolute top that say kind of the high level, like, we want to do workforce. And then there's a lot of staff underneath that that are trying to figure out, okay, what does that look like? How do we actually deliver those results?
I'm going to double down on that at the local level, because even when we did our outreach, so within DC, so within a city, within a local market, talking to folks, okay, what needs should we be fulfilling? And a lot of people said, we need workforce development, we need qualified vendors. And you're like, great. So what does that mean? And so to Madeline's point, the more specific you can be when folks ask you those questions, and this is sort of a challenge to the attendees, the better, because it's something that we can respond to in a very tangible way. Because I think a lot of us fully recognize that it's an issue, but the way in which we're able to go about tackling it, how we go about tackling it, how we're funded to go about tackling it, those are all things that we can start to piece together. But it's definitely the specificity that really helps, because I will do what I can. I just have to know what it is, or I have to be able to figure out exactly what it is and where we can have the most impact. So I think it starts sort of here and it trickles all the way down.
So we've articulated the workforce problem and given some examples of solutions and what's happening at many different levels to lead and to design those solutions. So I'd like to drill down a little bit on equity and inclusion. So from your lens, what steps are being taken or need to be taken to ensure that progress in workforce recruitment and training is inclusive and equitable? And are there some examples of success in this regard?
I can go first on this one, if that's okay. I just want to point to, it's a great segue from Madeline saying that they're offering some assistance for Workforce Accelerator partners. So here at the Smart Building Center, we're actually in the process of performing a diversity, equity, and inclusion self-assessment to actually analyze SBC program reach, participation, and success rates in Washington State as a means to establish a baseline metrics for setting goals for improvement. Back to same as energy efficiency, you can't manage what you don't measure. So we kind of need to know where we are with our program participation, with our organizational reach, so that we can set some metrics for improvement. We will be finalizing a DEI action plan and methodology for annual reporting on our efforts. And then the objective of that is really to increase the reach of our programs and initiatives to ensure benefits are being realized by persons in socially and economically disadvantaged communities. And one way I wanted to just point to ways we're already doing that was using some technical assistance from the DOE's building the Workforce Accelerator program, who was able to connect us with the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. And we are developing a dashboard that will analyze BOC training and certification programs to look at participant diversity and systemic barriers to success amongst specific groups. Again, we don't know how to address barriers when we don't know what said barriers are. So this dashboard is helping to establish metrics, again, help us set goals for improvement and then track our progress over time. So that's what we're doing here at the BOC program for our and Smart Building Center for various programs. And then we also are looking at how we can diversify our instructor pool because it's really important for our students, or, when we're talking to students about getting into this career, to see themselves, right? To see someone that in their shoes, 10 years from now. And I think that to the extent that we can diversify our instructor pool is important to demonstrate, at that kind of leadership level. So those are just a couple of things we're working on, and thanks to, PNNL for the assistance with our dashboard. And Maddie.
Yeah, of course. We're exactly the types of projects that we want to be supporting with the accelerator, and in general of, how can we kind of build the bridge from where we are as organizations and as programs to where we would like to go. And yeah, I'll say diversity, equity, and inclusion goals are hugely important to Department of Energy. They have been for a while, and I think there's a lot of opportunity right now to do some of that self-assessment work on the DOE side on how we can improve or make our resources more accessible to more people. And so that has been a real big process that's ongoing internally around, what resources are we really asking for people to have already in order to benefit from DOE's resources. And I think in certain cases that barrier is really high. In all honesty, it takes a lot to apply for certain types of funding opportunities. It takes the ability to not only fill out the application and have all your documentation order, but also to wait for a chunk of time while you're, seeing where things land. And so I don't have, a perfect solution that we're ready to roll out on that front yet or anything, but it is something that we are looking at and trying to be creative about what are the different ways we can look at different funding mechanisms that can, help people along the way, right? And not just, at the very end of the application process. And also, what are ways that we can encourage and foster more teaming and partnerships? Because we also know that, accessing things like federal dollars, often there's lots of organizations and people that are really good at it because they've been doing it for a while, right? And are there ways we can leverage that expertise that does exist out there to be partnering with folks that maybe have less experience in that space and to kind of work together on projects? And how can we kind of work with folks in a way that that nudges that towards happening more? But the White House and Department of Energy leadership have put out various energy justice plans and goals. There's kind of the EJ40 initiative, which is premised on the idea that 40% of the benefits of DOE's programming should go to energy and environmental justice communities. And so we're in the process of defining kind of all aspects of that sentence and to make sure it's something that we can track and hold ourselves accountable to. But, I think there's a few different ways we're thinking about it in terms of folks that have really either not benefited from energy technologies by and large so far, so have really been left out of things like energy efficiency and smart technology. I think of a lot of like low-income households that they have not replaced equipment or broken windows and things for decades because there's been financial barriers. So there's kind of that aspect of it, and then there's also folks that have bared the brunt of kind of the negative externalities of energy infrastructure as well. So that can look like a few different things. But really trying to take that seriously and frankly learning from some of the partners that we're working with to figure out how they're defining these issues and what things we all think are going well with certain organizations out in the field. Probably Lindsay can speak more to this, but Lindsay's organization is partnered with Emerald Cities Collaborative, which is another organization that we wanted to loop into the Workforce Accelerator, and I think has shown some really promising work in this area as well. And then, kind of another layer to add in is that we're also engaging in a lot more conversations with unions these days and really trying to think about kind of a larger idea of what justice and fairness and equity looks like, where workers are being fairly compensated for the services that they're providing, and how can we help foster that as well? Lots of thoughts, not a whole lot of answers, but
I'll sort of take that ball and take that lateral and also sort of answer one of the questions in the chat about concrete steps. And so what Madeline was saying, and I also see the Emerald Cities folks on the phone today, so they were huge partners in sort of helping us put together these resources. So if you think through that our sort of role in this space is upskilling incumbent labor and helping owners find qualified vendors. So we're trying to figure out how we do this all in one move. It's always my job to sort of figure out, like, how do I spend $1 twice? Like, how can we sort of make two moves happen, or two things happen with one move? And so one of the things that we have packaged with Emerald Cities is this idea about high road contracting or high road procurement principles and practices. So how do you use your money to also do social good while achieving the environmental goals you want to achieve? And so it's the idea that, like, you're hiring companies that you yourself potentially would want to work for. They pay a livable wage. There's good benefits. They do ongoing training. And so it's this idea that you're using your money to also achieve social good as well. And so we're looking at helping owners and operators procure services to improve their building's performance as required by law in DC, but also providing tools that enable them to do it with social values in mind. And so I'm really excited. Next month, in partnership with Emerald Cities, we are rolling out some tools and templates to actually help people do this in practice. So we've got solicitation document checklists, contractor selection criteria, RFP narratives, RFP response templates, good faith criteria. So it's all about showing people exactly how to embed this in their business. That's sort of where I get real jazzed up about this kind of stuff. It's not just environmental, but how do we bake it into their business practices? And that for me is what's really exciting. And I think you see a lot of these things happen in public procurement where, you know, in DC, if your contract value is over X hundreds of thousands of dollars as a federal or as a public fund, a certain percentage of that has to go to small, local certified businesses. But that mandate doesn't exist for the private sector. And I'm hoping that as a lot of private companies have started to pivot to focus on social values, that they will start to open their eyes and start to expand the way that they do business to also use their spending power for good as well. And so that's sort of a concrete example of what we're hoping will help, one, ensure that the job opportunities that are being presented, there is more awareness of those job opportunities that are being presented by smaller minority-owned contractors, and that they're prepared to compete for those jobs as well. So it's a twofold thing we're trying to tackle there.
Well, I just want to start to wrap this up and just tell our panelists a big thank you. This was a terrific interactive discussion. We have just 3 minutes left. We will end on time, but I just wanted to do a quick whip around if there were 30 seconds of any last words that people had. And I think Melanie is going to give some instructions or has some last words. So do we want to start with Melanie and then go to Lindsay and then Maddie? Or Melanie, did you want to finish us out?
Yeah, well, I think we might have 15 more minutes. Is that right, guys?
Sorry, so it's 11. Okay, so good, because I had like a pretty powerful question that's on my sheet here about outcomes. So thank you.
Not to panic. We have a little more time if people can hang on. Yeah, I think it runs until the quarter till, so.
Thank you. Well, hopefully everybody's still on. I do see we still have all of our attendees on, so thank you for jumping in there before I cut this short. So I want to go a little bit to outcomes. So we've done some definition of the problem, although there are some questions about the magnitude. Like what is the scale of need? Maybe we should go to that first. And then I'll just prep our panelists with what I'm going to follow up with. I'm going to be asking, and I'll repeat this when we get back to it, but I'm going to be asking about the magnitude of opportunity for a better trained workforce, and then what would be the consequences of failure if we didn't do that. So I'll repeat that when I come back to it, but let's start with the scale of need, and that relates to the first part of that question. So there are some questions about like, what exactly is the scale of need? How many people are needed across the spectrum? And we hear this in our region as well. And I know that there's some local and state definitions, but really when we're talking about this, what is the scale of need? How many people are needed nationally? And please feel free to speak also from regional or state if that's your area for smart building jobs.
I wish I had a quick number I could just point to and say, hey, we finished the analysis and this is what the number is. We have some analyses going on. They are not totally specific to smart buildings, but they are kind of holistic, focused on energy efficiency job needs. I think we need a lot of people. I've seen at a larger scale, I've seen estimates for like kind of the clean energy decarbonization transition. We need anywhere from a couple million to 25 million. It also depends on if you're counting, non-permanent jobs like some rapid scale construction deployment versus more permanent jobs that stick around like operations and maintenance. So you'll often kind of see analyses with a big boom curve of getting a lot of build out done. And I'll also just say like all of the analyses that we have done, can do in this space are really goal dependent, right? The way we think about a job for a year changes a lot based on what level of penetration of these technologies are we trying to achieve within how many years, right? How much do you need to kind of reorient everybody to work on this for a shorter period of time versus, do more of a ramp up and then have jobs extend for a longer period of time. I've seen estimates even just like on the electricians front that we need like, a few million more electricians, which is just one job title. So, I'll say this, that we have so much existing building infrastructure that needs work, whether you're thinking about it from a climate perspective or from a cost perspective or from a health and safety perspective. There's been, like a lot of our infrastructure, there's been persistent lacking investment in this infrastructure and its ability to serve people. And so we need as many people as we can get. It's kind of where my head goes in this space. It's why, DOE has a variety of projects on the table, everything from how we recruit people in and also how we make retrofit efforts more productive. So how you can increase the use of technology and tools so that maybe per project you need fewer labor hours, but under the premise of you're getting a lot more projects done. Because fundamentally we need to scale the speed that we've been doing this, multi-fold compared to where we've been before.
I can give a little specificity for the DC market. DOEE, so little brother, not big brother DOE, so the Department of Energy and Environment, District Department of Energy and Environment, recently just released a report of a landscape and needs and landscape assessment that Emerald Cities and Inclusive Economics put together. So I just pulled up the report to make sure I got the numbers right. But they estimated that 3,000 to 4,000 full-time equivalent jobs will be needed to implement the district's carbon emissions, so net zero targets by 2050, with about half of those being attributed to new jobs. Thinking that most of the demand will be in architecture, engineering, and construction, but some, of course, entry-level professional jobs will be needed as well. So that's just sort of one market, one specificity, but it's always curious to me because DC operates as a larger metropolitan region. And so what that actually means for the larger region is always a larger question of how regionally the district, Maryland, and Virginia are thinking about workforce development, because we are a metropolitan region. We're not just within the district's borders, but so those are some numbers with just our market. So if someone can multiply by the big cities and the little cities and figure out what that means, but those are our numbers.
Well, that's a great segue to me, Lindsay, because anyone who knows me knows I'm not a numbers person, but Corrine might actually be able to give some numbers with her work. So I'll let her do that in a minute. But I think really, magnitude to me, I don't have a number, but I do have, are we going to meet these goals or not? Someone in the chat, mentioned, I don't know if anyone was able to attend the first session, but talking about meeting these carbon reduction goals. And I think without addressing these challenges, we're not going to meet that. So that's the magnitude, right? Like we're not going to meet these climate goals that need to happen to address just the climate issue, the carbon issue. So I would challenge everyone on the call today to do, I try to live like, what's my next right thing? Like, what is my next thing that I can do? So I would challenge everyone to take one step today to address, we can talk about the things that are being done just take one step, reach out to your organization and say, do we have let me see a job description for someone in facilities, or do we have a training pathway for those entering? Reach out to one of us. Maybe that's your right thing. Reach out to one of us. Go to a link that, Madeline put in the website, or excuse me, in the chat. Just do one thing today. Reach out to us. If we all can just do one next right thing, I think we can get there. So I don't have a number of the people, but we're all out here, trying to do the best work. And if we all can address that in our own small circles, and then globally looking at these really great programs, the Workforce Accelerator, the hub that's established in DC, what's happening here in Seattle with some really aggressive policies to address climate change. Good things are happening, and to the extent that you can just do one small thing to get connected with the people doing the work, I think is really important.
So thanks, Melanie. So I don't have off the top of my head the exact number for our region. What I do have, and I can put a link in the chat, we actually we track like multiple pathways. So I can put a link in the chat for our STEM by the numbers report. And so we take a look at, like, with youth in our region, how many are on track for a credential that would lead to a family wage job in a high demand sector. And then what are the indicators along the way, all the way from early learning through credentials? What are the indicators, and what's the percentage? So we look at, like, there's 80% of family wage jobs in the region are going to require a credential. 48% of those will require a credential in STEM literacy. And so when we talk about, like, how many of those K-12 students will actually fill those positions, how many have opportunities. So the link I'm going to put in the chat is a more global link, and it breaks it down also by race and ethnicity and education attainment. So I'll go ahead and put that link in the chat, and I apologize for not having those specific numbers for our region at hand.
No apology needed. I don't have them either.
What I did want to throw out is the second part of that question. So the magnitude of opportunity for a better trained workforce, so we touched on that, but what are the consequences of failure? What if we don't do this? What's going to happen?
Trying not to end on a gloom and doom note, so I'm trying to reframe what I would say to not have so.
How about the consequences of if we don't do that, and then, like, if we do nothing else, we need to do this? So something like a beacon of hope, or something that, gosh, we really, here's the one thing, if we don't do anything, we have to do this.
I think that in the absence of sort of a global solution, which won't happen, I would just challenge everyone on this webinar to do one thing that they can do to address it. So whether that's hiring an intern or talking to a client or whatever it may be, it's just figuring out exactly how we can all be part of the solution. I know that sounds very nonprofit-y, but I'm part of a nonprofit now, and that's what we do. And so I do think we can't just wait for the solution to be presented. We all have to do our part to sort of take one step. And I know that sometimes taking one step doesn't feel very meaningful, but if you impact one person, then it's worth it. So that's my challenge to the audience.
I think my challenge to the audience on this front, probably the government answer, I would challenge for one of those one things, one of these days, to tell the government exactly what you need. And it's maybe me, it's maybe somebody else. I don't know who you should talk to, but there is a lot of infrastructural power in the federal government, but also in state and local governments. And, we didn't get to where we are with a system that's perfectly designed to get us out of it. So we need to fix it. When things have been running in a way where we don't have a lot of economic, market, or governmental infrastructure for the ideas that we need to value the pollution that is being created. We need to value also the ability to not do that, right? We need to value buildings that create healthier living environments and work environments for the people that are in them. And some of those issues seem really, really daunting, but it is so helpful to get to hear from people, especially with, various levels of expertise or personal experience in these areas, and say, hey, this type of thing would make a really big difference to you and the work that you're doing. So yeah, I guess one thing I'll just say on the notion of if we don't succeed or fail, between all this stuff, there's a spectrum between failure and success on any of these topics. Because I bring this up partly in the context that I think, especially for young people, there's sometimes this like, oh, well, we can't succeed on climate change because it's already here. And so what's the point, right? But there is a big spectrum of between where we are today and where things could go, either in a positive or negative direction. And there's going to be moments of failure and there's going to be moments of success. And I think that, not to end on just like, mindfulness or something, but really trying to center yourself in the space of what are the things that we can succeed on, even as some things maybe don't work as well as we want. How can we learn from those? And how can we drive progress forward regardless?
Go ahead, Karine. I was just going to say, I don't have much to add. You guys did a great job on kind of driving these points home.
Yeah, totally agree. And thank you for that perspective. And thank you for the recognition that we have, a problem here. Here's the magnitude. Here are some solutions. And here are some ways that you can get involved. Now we really are 3 minutes away until the end of our session. So I'll just do a quick whip around. And by the way, the document that I referenced, thank you, Brittany, the PDF is in the chat now, and feel free to contact me if you want more info about that. Wanted to just do a quick whip around. Any last words? And then we'll give Melanie the very last word today. But I just want to tell our panelists and our participants a big thank you for staying engaged and for the multiple perspectives. I think everybody is walking away with a lot of learning and some next steps. So just do a quick whip around. Any last words? So no from Lindsay. Madeline, any last words from you?
The last link I'm going to put in the chat is to where you can get where all funding opportunities are posted from the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. I'm not aware of something immediately available right now, but I just recommend people check it out every once in a while because we like to fund projects.
That is a definite next step that everybody see. If you wait till the very end, you definitely get a bonus here. All right, Melanie, we'll just turn it over to you to close it out.
Great. Thank you, Karine. And thank you to the audience for joining the Smart Buildings Exchange and making our conference successful. If you have questions, my information's in the chat. So is Lindsay's and Madeline's, and, just driving home again that, we know that when we were planning this session, it was, okay, we all know there's a problem. Let's get out some information about some of these tangible solutions, tangible ways that, we can all affect change in the positive direction. So I hope you're all walking away with one next right thing that you can do, and some information on the efforts that are underway as far as the professional development, training, credentialing, to ensure that our buildings are running optimally and are prepared for these new smart buildings and smart buildings technologies and trends that you're learning about, today and tomorrow in our conference. So thanks so much for being here.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks, Madeline. Thanks, Lindsay. Kareen, thank you so much.
Thank you all.